You ignore them when they pop up in one or two local papers. That story gets killed and shut down. You have a Rowley pop up who puts out some whitewashing. Yeah, we're inept. Give us more funding and power, and we won't do this anymore. Here's a report out of American Free Press. Come fly with me. It was also reported in the Detroit Press and New York Times and Newsweek. But they reported it first. A Saudi flying instructor who died mysteriously on May 8th had the same name as two 911 hijackers who lived at the same U.S. Naval Air Base. Remember 911 supposed hijacker Saeed Al-Amidi? Remember him? Well, it turned out there were a whole bunch of other Al-Hamidis at the Pensacola Naval Air Station training in some top-secret program by Royal Saudi Air Force Major Ambarak S. Al-Midi, had continued to remain in his position at the Pensacola Naval Air Station as a flight instructor after 9/11 attacks, notwithstanding his Saudi government ties, and that most of the terrorists were Saudis. A story broke on CNN on September 11, 2002, that not only had the FBI had informants inside the hijackers' homes, but they'd also been their landlords. So let me put this all together. We got the head of Pakistani intelligence, this general, a known CIA officer, sending $100,000 to the supposed lead hijacker, Muhammad Atta. These guys are trained at the Pensacola Naval Air Station, the hijackers. They're also trained at the Monterey Defense Language School to be spies in a top-secret U.S. government program now released. And on top of it, other hijackers have FBI informants living with them who are also their landlords. Funding, training, protecting, shepherding Al-Qaeda. It never ends. You couldn't write a science fiction movie this bizarre. On September 7th, the British Broadcasting Company, the BBC, dropped another bombshell. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Taliban warned U.S. of huge attack. One of their top envoys specifically gave information to the U.S. Embassy and called the White House telling them that Al-Qaeda was going to attack New York with hijacked jet airliners on September 11th. What did the U.S. government do when they got control of Afghanistan? They arrested the Taliban minister that had issued them the detailed warning. And it made perfect sense for the Taliban. Why on earth would they want someone to attack the U.S. and bring the wrath of the New World Order down upon them? Again, it's common sense. Who has the motive here? And then the evidence. Think about that. Our government knew the attack was coming, had been warned by the Taliban and nothing was done, and then when the globalists take over Afghanistan, they arrest the man that warned them? Yeah, you got to keep control of witnesses like that.
Well, freedom, justice, and a world rid of terrorism are just some of the stated aims for Operation Enduring Freedom. But is there another reason for bombing Afghanistan? With worldwide demand for oil increasing and some of the Gulf states looking very vulnerable, the U.S. is desperate to tap the oil fields of Kazakhstan and other central states. And as ITN's economic correspondent Lian Halligan now explains, Afghanistan is key when it comes to moving that oil to the West.
The September the 11th atrocities sparked a coalition, a crusade, said George Bush, for freedom and justice. But take a closer look. There's an important subtext to the struggle over Afghanistan: oil. Over the last few years, you may have read that the West, and particularly the US, is becoming less oil dependent. But it's just not true. Back in the 70s, the US used 16 million barrels every day. Today, that's ballooned to 22 million, making America by far the world's biggest oil importer. The European Union used 12 million barrels a day 30 years ago, but now it's 15 million. And oil's not just used for petrol for cars. Right now, you're watching a television made of plastic, presumably in a well-warmed room, and probably wearing man-made fibres. And all thanks to oil. So where does it all come from? Saudi Arabia, of course, is the biggest exporter, over 7 million barrels every day. Iran, Iraq and Kuwait are big players too. But don't forget the former Soviet Union, which exports almost 4.5 million barrels daily. Apart from Russia, it's these newly independent Central Asian states, particularly Kazakhstan, that are key. Already 20 billion barrels of oil reserves have been found in Kazakhstan, and there could be much more. The oil and gas so far discovered in these parts is worth $3 trillion in today's prices. That's why Western money men are so interested in getting this oil to world markets.
It's also important in this film to look at motive. Dick Cheney's company Halliburton, that he CEO'd from 95 to 2000, is now building the giant Trans-Afghan pipeline that will carry hundreds of billions of dollars of oil to the West. Markets begging for black gold. Then, of course, there's also opium, the second largest opium reserves in the world. Huge poppy belts in Central Asia, centering around Afghanistan. Hundreds of billions of dollars more that the globalists stand to gain by controlling this vital region. But it's not just about oil and opium. It's about being able to attack any country by simply claiming that they are harboring terrorists. This is the pretext empire needs to invade dozens of lands. In fact, the White House has told us this war won't last decades, it won't last generations, it will last hundreds of years. They've said that on the record. But that's just internationally. Oil, opium, war. It's also internationally about selling weapons. The Carlyle Group and the Bushes. In fact, that's why on September 11th, while all other air traffic was grounded, the bin Laden family was flying out via their private jets from Boston and Miami, because they're intimate business partners with George W. Bush and his CIA director father. By the way, the Carlyle Group's gone from the number 5th largest defense contractor in the world to the largest defense contractor in the world in only a matter of months after September 11th. But if that isn't enough motive for you, weapons, oil, opium, being able to start these wars, to sell the weapons, if that isn't enough for you, let's look at the domestic reasons. A massive police state crackdown, a cashless society control grid, Homeland Security taking control of the states and annihilating the 10th Amendment.
The president was in Florida when word of the attacks first broke. Reading with a group of elementary students, Mr. Bush was stopped cold when his chief of staff delivered the news.
One of the most compelling images that Americans have ingrained and printed on their minds from September 11th in 2001 was President Bush giving the little goat story to the elementary school students in Florida. Andrew Card, his chief of staff, walks in, tells them the president looks grave, and then we were told in the news that that's when the president first learned that anything was amiss. Later, at a press dinner, Bush told the news media that, oh, indeed, he had seen the first building struck by the aircraft, that he saw the first aircraft actually strike the building. People said, well, how could that be? For the first few weeks, that video was not even known to exist. And we'd heard that he didn't hear about it until the second building had been hit. In fact, that's what they told us. The White House press secretary had reported that. Well, then suddenly it got leaked that there were photos of the president watching the first building on fire before the second aircraft hit. When that got published in the Times of London, suddenly they changed their story yet again that, oh yes, they really had seen the first building smoking. The point is, why would they lie about that? Why would they claim that he first learned from Andrew Card while reading the little goat story to the school children, then change it back again and go back again and go back again? Endless lying, endless deception. What we know is this. This is the fact. That was a staged event with President Bush supposedly learning of the tragic events of September 11th while reading the story to the elementary students. That way you could already be tuned in to the tragedy and you could see the president learn of it after you knew. It was a great moment of bonding with you and our new hereditary dictator, King George II. A Trade Center warning baffles police. Now, I remember hearing that the schools were half empty nearby at the World Trade Center. The building was 2/3 empty for the capacity. Normally that time of morning there were 30,000 people in the building. By afternoon, 50,000. There were only 3,000, and 500 of those were firefighters and valiant police. There have been hundreds of reports, confirmed reports, that people were worn out to go to work that day. The building was almost completely empty, and it should have been half full at that time of day. So Newsweek and MSNBC tried to go out and disprove that. And the headline is, Trade Center Warning Baffles Police. An urban myth turns out to be true, but what does it mean? Right here. I went to Brooklyn this week in search of an urban myth about the World Trade Center attacks. What I came back with was no longer a myth. It was cold, chilling fact. People have been warned not to go to work again. Here's another one. This is the Times of London, September 27th, bin Laden's trail. The author Salman Rushdie was warned, and they called the FAA, the Times of London did, was warned the month before and banned from flying commercially for the month of September for his safety, because there's a fatwa, a hit out on him, a contract is out on him publicly from Iran. Times of London, September 27th.